Hey!
There you go. Have a freeze on
Hey!
that.
All right, so we'll turn the music off. All the alerts are no bueno. All that good stuff.
Tell the Twitter that we're going to talk about wrestling.
I love it. That's a smart move. That's marketing. Tugi, if nothing else,
Hmm.
you are a marketing genius.
I wouldn't go that far.
You are a
Cheap.
marketing sub genius.
We need a
Just
different word that sounds insulting.
sub genius?
Yeah.
Below
I mean,
genius.
yeah, at a base level, it just means, hey, you're not a genius. It doesn't mean you're inherently not smart, but at the same time, it still sounds condescending.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So Broken Wheelchair actually, as we've been playing games, has come up with some fantastic questions. So he might pop those in chat.
I'm excited.
What?
Make sure on stream. I just found my new favorite GIF. If you could pop up that tweet on stream.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, that's a good one.
You know what? I was talking about
Whew.
doing this anyway, so let's do.
Oh God. Whew. We have fun here.
We have the funnest of fun.
Oh God. Not tired at all. We'll get through this. It's fine.
I'm counting on you.
Get through. I hope not. When did I say I'm reliable and dependable?
I don't think those words together have ever come out of your mouth.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
I mean, in that succession at the same time is kind of what I meant. Yeah.
I see. Gotcha.
Sure. Let's do this. Let's do that.
Fine. It's fine. Our friendship's not different now or anything. Not at all.
Just want to make sure I'm not cutting too much of you or me or do that. Yeah, if you can lean over like there's a mosquito in your room, that'd be.
I'll just be over
Just
here.
saunters over.
I'll just be over here. It's fine. I'll be looking over here half the time and be like, what's he looking at?
Let's see this. Oh my God.
It's a good GIF.
Edge has got some of the greatest facial expressions ever.
From a wrestling standpoint, absolutely.
From what other standpoint would he not?
I mean, I don't know. Does he hold up against actors?
He is an actor.
Yeah, but that's
and not even in the ring. Like he's got a resume.
But you said from a wrestling standpoint.
You said from a wrestling standpoint. I wanted to know.
You said in wrestling, which would then equate it to being from a wrestling standpoint, would it not?
Gonna have to check the tape. Have to check the tape on that one.
No instant replay, baby.
Yep.
And even when we have it, you can't change the decision.
It needs undeniable.
Even with proof, screw you.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody to the second Turnbuckle podcast.
Make sure you include that first part.
Yeah, that's our cold open. Over there to my right, to my left on screen, but this is my right shoulder. That's why I'm confused. What is going on?
Fighting out of the blue corner.
It's Tugi24.
It is.
I'm Crash Andrews, by the way. I forget to introduce myself because Tugi's way more important to this whole dog and pony show than I am.
You are just correct.
Listen, this is going to be an interesting show because usually we talk back and forth. I know you've had a day. I've had a little bit of a day myself. So we don't have an outline as much with this show, but it tends, with the podcast, it tends to take a mind of its own as it progresses. So we will start with chat. We are live on twitch.tv/Crash Andrews. We'd probably get more viewership if Toogie did it, but he doesn't want to, so that's fine.
I mean, I could.
Nah.
It's just, you know,
People would get more sick of you.
streaming's a part of my job,
Yes.
and Twitch would punish me for deviating from my normal stuff by saying, "Oh, you're inconsistent. We're not gonna pay you as much money now."
Speaking of which, I
So,
gotta
as
switch
much
the
as
category.
I love you and love talking about wrestling, I love this roof over my house that much more.
Translation: fuck you. It's about the money.
It is. In this instance, it is.
I love it.
Is. You don't do the podcast for the money. The podcast is for the love of the game.
Yeah.
But
The Twitch, when Twitch gets
it's
involved.
not number one on the podium.
Yeah, and also notice I don't have my sub count on my screen. I don't know if you guys saw on I'll plug my Twitter _Andrews Crash_Andrews. I was watching a streamer and he was like, "Oh, they don't, the turbo's going up and the payout's going down and blah blah blah." Meanwhile, he's got like his sub count. Twitch sucks, as he's got his sub count on Twitch on his overlay. I thought it was hilarious. Broken Wheelchair asks a wrestling question. What was the last title change that legitimately surprised either of you? That's part A. He's got another question. So, which title change? We can go, as far as I'm concerned, we can go any Fed. You can go overseas if you need to. I'm not. I know which one it is, but I'm gonna. If you need time to think, I can run with my answer.
Well, so I thought I was going to, and then you said if I had to like go overseas for the answer. I'm trying to think. Okay, what's the first one that comes to mind, and then can I think in that range of then to now for another one that's more shocking?
Go right ahead and do your the first one that comes to mind, and then I'll answer, and that gives you a chance to think about any others.
So the first one that comes to mind for me is overseas, as you might suspect, and it is when Okada won his first IWGP Heavyweight title over Hiroshi Tanahashi. The reason is that was the catalyst for me saying, "Oh, I need to watch this stuff," because New Japan at the time was a lot more difficult to track down. Unless you were looking stuff up on Dailymotion, or Lord knows I would never, ever go the torrenting route for something that was readily unavailable in my country before the rise of VPNs. I would never do.
We do not promote
such a thing.
that. We do not promote that here on this stream.
Never, ever. I have never sailed the high seas. It was very, very difficult to follow along. And even then, in the next couple of years, it still became difficult. Like New Japan was running on like Ustream and stuff like that. It was wild before New Japan World was a thing. All of that to say, essentially at the time, this was 2012. First 2 months of 2012. It went from, here is this guy who was in Impact, who was a joke, essentially. Now, that was not supposed to be Okada's, known as Okato's, role in New Japan. And shout out to Ben Verlander, who's going to be like, baseball, and yet here we are talking about wrestling nonsense. Crash, I'll give you a second to address that if you care to. Actually, go ahead. Do it now. Explain to people why you're not talking about baseball.
Did I not update my I hit done?
Oh, you did. It shows in talk shows and podcasts, but
yeah.
Ben.
So Ben has a very successful podcast about baseball. In a amazing flip here, we have not as successful podcast about wrestling.
As you do.
Yeah, Ben, we love you. Thank you for the 65. If you guys love wrestling, please stick around. If you don't, I don't blame you for leaving right away.
Yeah.
Or
at least most of them got hit with an ad immediately.
Yes.
So that's nice.
So I figured out, remember last week I was like, Ben, we love you. Appreciate you. You are the best Verlander of them all. Remember how I was complaining that I heard a sound? I know what it is. It is, for some reason, I've got my when somebody uses their Prime to sub, I've got that on my alert for raids. So it's actually Optimus Prime saying Prime, but super slowed down. It goes Prime. Sounds almost like Megatron.
Good alert.
But yeah.
Good alert.
Anyways, if you got stuck in a pre-roll, we're doing a wrestling podcast. We probably will play some. We were playing baseball earlier. We love Ben Verlander. Hopefully you love us. Tugi, you were talking about Okada, right?
I was.
And a surprise championship. Feel free to continue if you can try and make it as seamless as possible.
I will continue my incredibly nerdy story.
Yes.
Let's be honest though. You're on Twitch watching a sport. You're a nerd anyway. Whether or not you're watching a wrestling podcast on Twitch, watching someone play MLB, as we so often do, Crash, on this platform, the people that watch us are absolute nerds, just like ourselves. You have to be a nerd to be like, hey, I'm going to watch a video game stream.
There's some that aren't absolute nerds, but they're still nerds nonetheless.
You know.
Joseph, you know what? Joseph, because you bring that up, we can talk about that in a little bit. That's actually a really good topic.
The rules.
Yeah.
The rules in
wrestling
rules. I would disagree. I would disagree about that being a good topic because there's just no right answer because it just doesn't exist.
Well,
anyway,
it creates a segue for me once you're done. So
fair enough. Anyway, yes. So Okada, Complete Joke, and TNA, they're like, oh no, we'll take him. It's fine. We'll build him up into something and it'll be cool. And then they didn't because it was TNA / now known as Impact Wrestling. And they dropped the ball on virtually everything that they've ever done, which is great. But basically, he goes back to New Japan, has a pretty meh match at that year's Wrestle Kingdom. And then at the end of the show, Tanahashi kept his title, and he comes out there, goes face to face with Tanahashi, challenges him, and the crowd audibly laughs because they're like, "What? Why? What are you? What is this? We don't want to see this. This guy's a nobody. What the hell's the matter with you?" That leads to the next month. Okada fucking beats him, and it was cool as shit. It was one of the best crowd reactions I think I've ever seen, and that was the match that really set it up for me to be like, yeah, I need to find a way to follow New Japan more frequently. And that was 11 years ago now. And I'm trying to think if there is another moment before or after that. I mean, I think the question was the most recent.
I don't think it was most recent.
Yes, the question was the most recent, and that still might be the most recent shock title change that I can recall.
So I think for me, obviously not having overseas knowledge or anything like that, for me it's Seth Rollins at WrestleMania, the cash in.
Fair.
Kind of having the background of watching wrestling, and you can kind of see how things were lining up. You don't go into WrestleMania with the Money in the Bank briefcase without a plan to cash in at WrestleMania. I don't think it's ever happened that somebody's gone past WrestleMania. Some people have done that night of when they've won it. Some people have waited to the next day, the next week, a couple months. Some people have announced that they're going to cash in at WrestleMania. But Seth Rollins had a match earlier on the card against Randy Orton, which had one of the most amazing finishes in professional wrestling as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
The fact that Seth Rollins lost that match started planting this idea in my head of he lost, which means he put over somebody else and is going to now win the championship. And now it looks like the person that beat him, Randy Orton, didn't need that rub. But on the same token, because he lost, I was like, he could. But is he going to do it tonight? He had his match, blah, blah, blah. Go through. I really enjoyed the entire pay-per-view. Except for, a give or take a thing here, a thing there. And then you get into two hosses that nobody wants to see at that time go at it in Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. It was an okay match, good back and forth. It had its decent pacing. And then there's a spot where they're both knocked on the ground. They're taking their time. And all of a sudden, Seth Rollins' music plays. And it was perfection. It was
Mhm.
absolutely the right time for it to happen. Seth Rollins runs down. I would say if you had to find a fault in the entire spot, it was the referee. And I think the referee knew what he was doing to build up the suspense, right? Because he was taking his, like, are you sure you want to cash? No? Okay. Are you sure you want to? You do? Okay. Like double checking. And Rollins is just losing his mind.
Mm.
And a couple minutes later, you get the finish of Seth Rollins winning a match he wasn't originally in. Um, just absolute, just was a fantastic finish to a WrestleMania. Um, I would throw in there the Jericho before he actually won the title, but winning the title, but having it pulled back. Jeff Hardy winning the title, um,
Mm.
and pulling it back on Raw. Not necessarily the same one, but I believe
Yeah.
both were against Triple H, and it was around the Helmsley McMahon era where Triple H, speaking of rules, he just made them up as he went. Um, but those were really cool out of left corner title changes ish that were very surprising. But Seth Rollins winning the title at WrestleMania, cashing in the Money in the Bank, is easily. I put it up there with the NWO. I put it up there with the birth of the NWO as far as one of the coolest surprises in wrestling.
That's that's fair in terms of twists, yes, and
Yeah.
in terms of how, obviously, in terms of like how monumental it was, the impact
Oh,
overall,
again, in the moment. Absolutely
obviously,
in the
but
moment.
yeah, yeah. I mean, again, the question was most recent, of course, too. Obviously, you start going further back, and you can get into some pretty crazy title changes, like you said, but and not just for world titles, obviously, too. But
Those are kind of the ones that kind of jump out uh, top of mind. Like, I can't think of an intercontinental title change that surprised me. Or like a
mm,
European Championship, Shawn Michaels dropping it to Triple H in
mm,
Philadelphia. All
mm.
places. The other question that Broken Wheelchair had, if I can scroll back up, was Macho Man Randy Savage the best promo in wrestling history? I would say yes, and I would make an argument against my own answer.
Elaborate. I'm intrigued.
Okay, so it really felt like Mach was allowed to just run as he went. Like that era, they probably gave him pointer notes and just let them run. And now we're kind of into an era, or have just gotten out of an era of scripted material.
Mm,
So, um, I love everything Macho Man Randy Savage did during his career. I don't see, even, I'm even trying to think of like what would be a bad thing he did. And I think he excelled at basically everything that he was given. His character had just the perfect amount of everything a wrestler should be, as far as I'm concerned. The argument I would make is I know that if I was too busy doing something, and I found out that The Rock was doing a promo, I would run. I'd run to the TV, turn it on.
mm,
There's guys who have had moments, such as the second guy we don't necessarily talk about, Phil,
mm,
uh, had one of the most iconic promos of all time.
mhm.
So, in as much as I would absolutely say yes, he is the best promo of all time, Randy Macho Man Savage, I even have this like, but there are others
Right.
that absolutely excelled. That it's a very close. Who's one? Who's two? Who's three? Who's four? There's a bunch that are in that upper echelon.
So Joseph had a really good point in regards. He said he'd mentioned Billy Graham, superstar Billy Graham, or Ric Flair. And for me, it was kind of weighing that factor, like you said, of like, oh, if someone's cutting a promo on TV, I need to watch. It's also the idea of who the most imitated happens to be, which was a big conversation last week when news of superstar Billy Graham's passing went out. Just the idea of, okay, who has the most copied promo style? It is him.
Mm-hmm.
do you judge it in terms of believability? In which case, someone like Dusty Rhodes could be in that argument for the best of all time.
His name popped in
Is
my head. Yeah.
Do you judge it based off of quotability and how well they kind of seeped into the mainstream lexicon, for lack of a better term? Like, there are people who haven't watched wrestling in their fucking lives who know Ric Flair, who know the Woo.
Yep.
There are people, and Randy Savage is right up there as well. There are people who have never seen a Randy Savage match. They know who the fuck Randy Savage is. They can quote the guy. So it's just there's so many different
Right.
kind of layers to that of like, well, just how do you judge it? If someone wanted to name Randy Savage as the greatest promo of all time, I couldn't necessarily disagree based off of hitting the mark with quite a few of those factors.
So just based on what you were saying about like the quotability and everything,
Mhm.
one of the more uh attention getting promos, I would put Hogan in there, even though his promos were just yelling and let me tell you something, Mean Gene, and eat your vitamins, say
Yeah.
your prayers, that kind of thing. Like it was repetitive.
I agree. But he is up there
But
for those reasons.
you definitely got sucked in by the intensity that he brought. I'm actually shocked that neither one of us said Jericho, because Jericho in WCW was a better promo than a wrestler, and worked on his wrestling to match where his promo was. Because Jericho could, he put Ralphus on the map. You know, like there's a guy who could take, throughout his career, he has taken the dumbest things and made them into the most amazing, like a list, like a scarf.
Plant.
Yeah, like he, as far as being able to do a lot with not very much, I would put Jericho way up there. You give him a microphone, even when he, oh, man, like when he came back and didn't say anything. You're telling me that you didn't want to see the next time he came out just in case he did say anything or why he was doing it? Like there was something about not saying anything that was compelling, almost to a like of Sting. Like there, again, apples and oranges, one character versus the other, but the getting silence over was absolutely amazing. So I'd put Jericho in that upper echelon as well, even though, you know, you don't put Jericho on the same level as a Ric Flair or a Randy Macho Man Savage. Like those guys are legendary. Whereas, and I don't know if it's recent bias or not, because he's still wrestling versus guys who aren't with us anymore, or Hall of Famers, or like Jericho's going in the Hall of Fame when he's done. But yeah, Jericho, I think it should get way more love than he does in this topic.
Yeah, I don't disagree. And it's funny you mentioned Jericho going into the Hall of Fame. In my mind, I'm like, he's already in the Observer Hall of Fame. Do you know when he was voted into the Observer Hall of Fame?
No.
2010.
Jesus.
2010, people already deemed it as like, yeah, this guy's a Hall of Famer. And they're right.
Yes.
Think about what he's done now in the last 12, 13 years to add to that.
So that's quite interesting, because you could, if you could segment, okay, so WCW, Chris Jericho, WWFE, Chris Jericho, AEW, Chris Jericho. Arguably, 3 Hall of Fame careers. Arguably.
WCW, no.
But he was part of a division that succeeded while getting crapped on.
But you don't.
I get the argument. I get the absolute argument. Wasn't he okay in WCW? Tell me when you found out that it was him that was the Millennium Man that you didn't want to see that first time he came out in WWE and they put him up against The Rock. Like, they don't do that unless they actually want to squash a guy
Or they're Cody Rhodes
or
at WrestleMania.
Billy Gunn.
Um,
So,
yeah, that too.
like I said, I'd make the argument that now I'm talking about WWEF Hall of Fame, which currently has The Godfather, and like
You don't need to go down the list of people who are in their
yeah.
Hall of Fame that make it laughable.
So I would say that in the WWE Hall of Fame, he has 3 Hall of Fame careers. I am going to leave it at that. Like, I'm not going to argue, well, what if it was this Hall of Fame? Yeah, if it's that Hall of Fame, WCW, he doesn't have a sniff.
Right.
But the 3,
Yeah, I mean,
if you could segment his career, WCW, WWE, WWF, and what he's done with AEW, I think the 3 definitely he's got 3 different careers that could actually go in as individual careers. And there's
I mean, again, for me, it's just the WCW side of things. The first half of his career in WCW was very meh, very bland. They
yes,
had him as the most generic
the Lion
face you could
Tamer.
possibly have. It wasn't until he finally got a chance to do that heel run where he was actually interesting. So I
Fair.
don't think, for me, if you're like, okay, WCW, WWE, AEW, and if you even wanted like a miscellaneous category to include New Japan, I don't think you could have the WCW portion of his career be Hall of Fame worthy for the sole purpose of it. Just they did not utilize him anywhere near to his full potential for the entirety of the first half of his time there.
No argument whatsoever. Also, Owen, thanks for the follow.
Yeah.
So on that standpoint, just because, we do have another question there, but it kind of just popped in my head. Just based on what we're talking about Jericho and segmenting into the 3s, is there anybody else that jumps out to mind that had an amazing career in any, and again, I say to you, in any federation, because you do have the overseas knowledge, that you could segment 2, maybe 3 careers and still put them into the Hall of Fame? Because there's Hogan, obviously. I don't know if you do Flair in his WWE run.
So for Hogan, would 3 different career, like, elaborate on that?
So when they go to different companies, I wouldn't be like,
Okay, so
like the biker Undertaker versus the dead man Undertaker. Like I mean, you could make that argument, but in this scenario, I would say had a Hall of Fame career here, went to different company, had a Hall of Fame career separate from, and then had 2 or 3 companies, and like the list is very short. That I would say 3.
the list is short for 2.
Yeah.
Is the issue. Like, the fact that you're saying like, yeah, Jericho, was he in the conversation for 3? Even the 2 is exclusive company.
Right.
Because Stone Cold Steve Austin does not have a Hall of Fame career in 2 different companies.
No.
He would be in the Hall of pretty good to very good in WCW,
Yes.
certainly in the Hall of holy shit were you underutilized by that company, right alongside Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho. But yeah, in terms of
Mick Foley.
Yeah, Jesus, like it depends on how strict you are to the definition of Hall of Fame career. But in terms of the idea of 3 companies, that's a hell of an argument in terms.
The other side too, though, is that we haven't really had 3 companies, right? Arbucks, thanks for the sub.
Yeah,
1 year,
so
Jesus.
you would have to be debating like modern time. Obviously, it would be like, okay, WWE, AEW, or still if you wanted to include like WWE, WCW in modern time, then you have to start getting into the conversation of, okay, considering the NWA pre Ted Turner buying WCW as its own thing, like
Yeah.
Jim Crockett Promotions, you would have to consider the AWA, which gets pretty difficult. I mean, I think there'd be some people who would say, at least the arguments there. Okay, did Hogan have a Hall of Fame worthy career in the AWA alone, and then WWE, and then WCW? Which again is why 3 is absurd.
Right.
2 was already difficult to have that on its own. And then AJ mentioned, like, do you consider Impact a worthy enough thing to be like, okay, here's this Hall of Fame level career from someone from a TNA perspective? And I think that argument is there, that that company's worthy, because you would have the conversation surrounding someone like AJ Styles and what he did in Impact slash TNA for 13 years. Would that have landed him in like the Observer Hall of Fame? Potentially. Um, so it's
So
tough, right? Because Christian's been mentioned in chat, and it's like, okay, like WWE, TNA, AEW, he hasn't
yeah,
been
yeah,
there
yeah.
long enough yet.
I think the more we dig into it, the more we can kind of make a like Phil's name came up in chat. I think
Mm.
you could give him that ish. That's a 1.5. I don't think he's really quite there, and he's got a long way to go
It's
to clean it up in the second company.
well,
But
I figured we'd talk about that too, and that's kind of the perfect segue, but I'll let you finish your thought.
the one that just popped in my head, and we can just run through it quickly, and because you've got the overseas knowledge, would you would you put AJ into a 3 category based on what he did in New Japan? Because you would in 100% in TNA Impact. Uh,
Mm.
I would make the argument that he's on the right side of the line in WWE at this point, what he's been able to do in his time there. So
Mm.
could you put him in? And again, we can use the WWE Hall of Fame guidelines ish, which is a little bit looser, but however you want to run with it. Would AJ
Oh, like
Styles make a Hall of Fame career based on his New Japan resume?
I, it was too short. It was a really, really good run. It was too short though for his run. Um,
So it was more Kawhi Leonard than it was Vince Carter.
yes, there you go. Sure, you want to make that that very Canadian centric
A.
comparison. It is on point though. Yeah, like it was his New Japan run was fantastic. I mean, the holding the championship, the match with Shinsuke Nakamura was legendary to the point where once it was like, oh, they're gonna have a match at Mania. Oh my god! And then they were allowed to go at like 30% speed for that match, and that's one
Right.
of the most disappointing matches I've ever seen. Neely mentioned Muda, and Muda's in there for at least 2 companies. There is a potential argument for him. I mean, Jesus, when it comes to, obviously like New Japan's the big company that he is most associated with. His WCW NWA run, you could kind of make that argument, and then obviously he had stints with Noah and All Japan. Like
Mm-hmm.
he might be at the foremost of like people in the conversation of 3,
Gotcha.
3 separate Hall of Fame careers, as you mentioned. It's an interesting topic because there's a lot of different ways to look at it.
So we talked about Phil twice, and it sounds like you want to talk about Phil again, AEW Phil, and I believe for good reason. So I'll give you where do you want to go with Phil?
Well, so you kind of mentioned that, and obviously now we know like it's happening, unless it's not happening, and then it doesn't happen, but it's probably going to happen. They announced last night on Dynamite, as pretty much everyone paying attention on the online portion. By the way, try to disengage from that. I promise you'll enjoy wrestling more. Lord knows I do. Um, but they are going to run that first episode of Collision at the United Center. And you do not book the United Center unless it's Forbidden Door or unless CM Punk's coming back in Chicago. So yeah, he who shall not be named, we're going to have to drop that nickname because, hey, he's coming back. And depending on how the second half of his AEW run goes, that will determine the legacy of it. He will always have what happened last year um, looming overhead
Yeah.
when his legacy is brought up. That'll always be looming overhead for him. But it is an exciting time. They have Collision coming up. You'll be going to
Mm-hmm.
a Collision, not taping, but an airing, a show later on this year in Calgary. I mean, I'm going to Dynamite in Boston in July. They have Double or Nothing this weekend, which I am pretty excited for. It's not the most hyped I've ever been for an AEW card. It's got some good stuff on there though. Particularly that Anarchy in the Arena match, a reunited Elite against Blackpool Combat Club. That's gonna be so much fun. So much fun.
Yeah,
Um,
it's definitely a pay-per-view that has got its moments that I'll probably watch, but it's
Mhm.
not like I don't know. I've always said that I've wanted like the anarchist Blackpool Combat Club to come out, and now that
mm.
they're kind of there, it's kind of lost its luster on me because they didn't do it sooner.
Well, that's the big issue I think that a lot of people will have with this card is yeah, they go 3 months without a pay-per-view.
Yeah,
Back in the day, that's not a big deal.
no.
Modern times, after 25 years of conditioning, more than that, yeah, almost 30, really. Um, because yeah, WCW started up with 4 or 5 pay-per-views at the end of the 80s into the early
Yep.
90s, and then obviously it was 95. Yeah, 95 that WWE started doing the In Your Houses
Right.
and started doing one every month. So you're talking about essentially for my entire lifetime now as a 29-year-old man, um, there has been a weekly pay-per-view from WWE for the past 28, 29 years.
Monthly, not
Eh,
weekly.
A month. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Jesus, weekly. It feels like it. Let's
Well,
be honest with
okay,
those 3-hour Raws. Hey,
you know what?
um,
What popped in my head really quickly is we technically have the equivalent of weekly pay-per-views with Raw and we used to only get one a week, and now we're getting into 3 uh of each brand, right?
mhm,
Like it's getting to that point, whereas you talk about the late 80s when pay-per-view, closed circuit television and ordering from home and getting the scrambled version if you didn't pay for it and you can listen to it, among other versions of pay-per-view.
mhm,
um you know you had the weekly shows were jobber shows,
mm.
and that's how they built the stories were, I mean, if they ever went back to that, wrestling would die. Like we're now at this point where you have to see Randy Orton versus somebody else who maybe doesn't have a storyline set up, and you hope he wins, but then the other guy comes out and, after 3 months, the feud is over, but they've had 3 matches. They've had the win, the other guy wins, and then you have the rubber match. Ish.
Right.
It happens every once in a while that it's only a one and done or whatever. But,
I mean, it's at the point where if Dynamite, like, because I saw that heading into this week, a lot of people were like, "What do you mean there's only 3 matches instead of 4, or 4 matches instead of 5?" And what do you mean it's not John Moxley against Kenny Omega on Dynamite, and you're giving us these 2 mid-carders? How dare you? Like, yeah, it's just it's tough to put the toothpaste back in the tube
Mhm.
in regards to how people have been conditioned to view the weekly shows and then the structure of the pay-per-views, the consistency of the pay-per-views. It's not easy, and I definitely think they have been harmed by it being 3 months, almost 3.5 since their last pay-per-view. I mean, it feels like 3 months ago that MJF and Bryan Danielson had that Iron Man match. It feels like longer than 3 months ago, if anything. Like that felt like that could have happened last summer, really. So
AJS, do you think AEW needs a cable subscription like Peacock for pay-per-views? I would say where AEW is right now, that would actually be counterproductive for them. I think they're still in that building mode. They're not on the same level as WWE as far as number of shows. I'm sure they're making enough money to grow, but they're not making WWE money by any stretch of the imagination. WWE's at that point where it was the only logical move for them to do versus, I think sooner or later we will get it, but I don't think that it happens in like even the next year or two. I think we're like 3 years away from an AEW model like Peacock or like the network was in the US, what it still is in Canada. but I don't think they've got the content yet, enough content to make it work. And I think they actually need the income from charging people $50 or $60 to make a go
They
of it.
would have to get a good enough deal from Max, essentially, formerly HBO Max, of course. Dumbest fucking title change. My God. We talked about shocking title changes. That's the dumbest title change. It would be better as a consumer because Bleacher Report fucking sucks. And that is the avenue that I have to go through to watch these pay-per-views. That said, it would be much easier if it's just like, hey, here's get it on Max and you can watch it with the cost of your subscription. But yeah, they would have to pay AEW enough to make that worth it to offset what they would lose from the pay-per-view costs in the first place.
Yeah,
so
to make it make
with you, it's at least a little bit away.
I think you'd have to take a share of the people that just are getting Max for like the Warner Brothers movies versus, getting it for, but then you have to give up enough for the people who are just getting the Warner Brother movies and don't want the wrestling. Like it just I don't see it being the right move for them right now, but the standard's already set. So sooner or later it should happen. It's going to happen as long as, and I'm not saying that I think that they won't be around in 2 or 3 years, but I still think that they're 2 or 3 years away from enough content to run a 24-hour channel, enough content to run a on-demand service, but also the viewership and just even the desire from the wrestling community. It's not 1A, 1B. It is still 1-2, even though, people want to say AEW. I'd argue AEW is a better product, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're making enough money to make a go of it to have a channel or an on-demand service to match. So, just to swing back to the whole, because I love that topic. That I don't know where that actually came from. It was Jericho.
Isn't it always?
Yeah, it's all about Jericho. Crockett and WCW, do they count as two different companies? I would argue yes, because it was NWA to start and kind of just transitioned into WCW sooner or later, right?
Two different eras.
Yeah.
So I think they would qualify.
Just to put a timestamp on this of when we're recording, even though what's his face isn't on the team anymore, Dallas Stars are not going home.
Yeah, I was watching the game there. So. I will say though, AEW wise, because we can stay on that topic.
Yeah.
The thing I am most hyped about is Fight Forever was given that release date of the end of June, and they did a stream with one Evil Uno and Orange Cassidy showing off more of the gameplay. My God, I'm gonna have so much fun with this video game. So it is exactly what I wanted it to be.
Yeah, and you and I have had some interesting discussion about some of the complaints and the graphics and blood and all of that stuff that's going to be available with this game. And every time we talk about it, we bring up No Mercy, and that was the blueprint. This is what they're going for, which is interesting to an old man like myself, because the No Mercy was not an arcade game. It was the most realistic wrestling game we had at the time. So to now call it an arcade game, and it's it won't have the best graphics. It'll have entertaining animation, graphics. Blood looks like it if you have it on, which you can turn it off, but if you have it on, it looks like it's gonna flow like almost every episode of Dynamite.
Can get nuts.
Yeah. So I think the expectation of this game, again, to go head to head with anything WWE produces, like this is going to be more All-Stars than it is 2K. Right? It's going to be more animated.
It's the same thing as the product itself. It's like, why try
It's
to make a
reverse.
game like 2K has? Why try to present a product like WWE presents be that alternative? And they're doing that from the gameplay perspective of this video game. They're doing that on a weekly basis where they're just like, yeah, we'll fucking bring Sabu out on Dynamite for no fucking reason, essentially. Why not? That's what we've always done, which I like personally, by the way. I mean, again, I mentioned this on my stream last
Oh
night
my
when I was
god.
asked about, like, oh, hey, it's a Sabu, huh? It's just that idea of AEW throughout their time. It's always been like, oh, here's this fucking random name from wrestling's past that's just here. Cool. Like when they were, I believe, yeah, it's when they were teasing, like, oh, who's the leader of the Dark Order? And during a random match, someone was fighting in the crowd, and then they're just like, is that Raven? And it just shows Raven sitting in the background watching the match with his arms crossed, and it's like the internet freaks out, like he's gotta be the fucking leader of the Dark Order. Like it was just cool shit like that. Whereas WWE is like, we have a Legends night because we need a spike in the ratings.
It's
Isn't
always the
that
same
fun?
guys though. It's
Teddy Long's gonna say holla holla playa, and then Ron Simmons is gonna say damn, and you're gonna come. Wrestling. It's like, no, not for me at least. I prefer Sabu to randomly just be like, yeah, I'm gonna be the special enforcer for Chris Jericho versus Adam Cole. Why? Because I fucking can be. Point. So why not?
I don't think anything I've seen in wrestling made me just automatic. Never mind. Yeah, the
Not
Sabu
yet.
thing. The Sabu thing was completely left field, and I get like Shivani as he's walking. Oh, he's got history with Jericho, and I'm like, yeah, but history that nobody really talks about because it was. I wasn't a big ECW guy when Jericho was in ECW, so like again, that's not a mainstream like. The reason Warrior returned to WCW made more sense than Sabu showing up on a random AEW thing because there was a feud in the past.
Yeah, but at the same time, I like that they at least try to just be like, yeah, fuck it. There was a thing once.
But like again, it's the investment into it and the payoff, and I'm like, so Adam Cole's just got Sabu's phone number hanging around? Like it didn't make any sense. Like Red Dragon coming back because who knows what they're doing right now? Like Bobby Fish is probably serving Filet-O-Fishes in some McDonald's drive-thru right now. Like
That's just rude.
well, what is he doing? Like to
I
get
don't care.
exactly fair. No, but like there's so many other options. There's so many, and then it's Sabu. And then you read your Twitter feeds and you realize what kind of piece of crap Sabu is outside of the ring, probably in the ring too. He he's one of the most entertaining professional wrestlers, and if anybody, I don't want to say if anybody deserves to be an ass in real life, it's him, but I've got all the respect in the world for anybody who's sacrificed for entertainment, and he has sacrificed for entertainment. But again, you can't, if you are mad at Hulk Hogan for dropping N-words and all that stuff, then how does Sabu get a pass? That is all I'm gonna say. Because he also dropped F-words and not fuck. So that's I'm just looking at your face right now. I'm like, we could have a whole show just arguing about Sabu and his.
No, we couldn't because I don't even like the guy. It's just fucking funny that he just randomly showed up on Wednesdays.
So I was thinking, okay, so instead of the guys we can't talk about, there's Chris, there's Phil, there's Jimmy.
Jimmy?
Superfly?
Oh, yeah, no, Jimmy should be on the list.
Yeah, Jimmy's on the list. Whatever Sabu's name is, real name or not.
Oh, I know what his real name is. Please take a guess.
Is it Steve? Because Steve would be amazing for Sabu.
It's not.
Oh.
His name, and this is one of the most famously funny things of all time. His real name is Terry Brunk.
Junior? Okay, so
B-R-U-N-K.
Oh my God. We
Terry Brunk.
So do we have to now come up with Terry 1 and Terry 2? And which one of the two Terrys? I guess Terry 1, there's a number 1.
So So Terry 1 would have to be Terry Funk. Terry 2 would be Balea because of the 2 letters he wrote on the side of the truck in WCW.
Among other
Terry
things.
3.
So Funk, I don't necessarily need details, but Funk makes this list. Like, not in greatest.
Terry Funk's a fucking legend. He doesn't make the list like everyone else.
No. That's what I'm saying.
One Terrence.
Instead, I'm just trying to freshen up the podcast. Instead of saying the guy we can't talk about, we now say Chris. We know who Chris is. We say Phil because we know who Phil is.
Yeah.
But if we're gonna have Sabu on this list, and his name is Terry, he's got to be Terry number 2 because Terry number 1.
Well, no, because Terry number 1 probably deserves to be called Terry 2.
I'm good with that. I'm okay if that's the ground. I'm bringing up the concept of not saying the guy we don't talk about anymore, that we actually use their first names. That Terry 2 is, yeah, I'm okay with that. So Terry 1 currently.
Keep digging ourselves a hole here.
Terry 1 currently is Sabu.
Okay,
Sure. Do you have history?
I do. Now, it's almost a shame, of course, because we do the day of the recording instead of the week of. But if we did the week of between shows, there'd be way too much to talk about. But today, and again, got to shout out TJRwrestling.net. Lovely resource for stuff like this. May 25th, the day we are recording this, a couple of things happened. 1994, Jeff Hardy makes his WWE debut at a taping in Erie, Pennsylvania, losing to the 1-2-3 Kid. Coincidentally, on the same show, Brian Lee was introduced as the fake Undertaker by Ted DiBiase. My question to you, how old was Jeff Hardy when he made his WWE debut?
Jesus. He wasn't 18. I know he wasn't 18, and he should have been,
Correct.
Like, based on legalities and everything like that, he should have been 18. For some reason, 16 pops out of my head.
You got it.
Yeah.
He was 16 years old in a match with Sean Waltman on television.
Man, if there's anybody that you want carrying you as a 16-year-old in a professional wrestling match for the biggest, well, I guess at the time it was kind of neck and neck, but oh man, it's Sean Waltman to teach me the ropes of professional wrestling.
On this day in 2002, two big things happened. Chikara held its first ever show in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you had any experiences with that promotion. I did. I went to shows. I watched as much of this promotion as I could because it really was it was almost like the feeling I would get from watching this company, which was so like lucha heavy, but also designed to be, I guess, apparently to the antithesis of what some people backstage were doing in terms of being scumbags. But it was just all about fun. It was all about fun. It was very family friendly. And it was just such a breath of fresh air. And almost to me, like now when I watch like Ted Lasso and just how wholesome of a show it is.
When it's
Chikara,
not, but yeah.
Chikara, in a sense, had that thought of like, this is just wholesome, fun, themed around wrestling, but also that had some incredible goddamn matches in its day. We mentioned Sean Waltman. He had a match against El Generico one year. That it was in like 2010, 2011. It was awesome.
You know who that guy reminds me of?
No, who?
He really reminds me of Sami Zayn.
I was gonna say Kevin Owens.
Oh.
Yeah. But no, I loved that promotion deeply, and it's a shame that it kind of went out the way that it went out. But something that you might have thoughts on. In 2002, May 25th, WWF Confidential, I guess it would have been WWE Confidential, made its debut on TNN/Spike TV.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any memories of watching the show? Because I certainly do.
I actually don't. Now,
in
saying that, like, I couldn't tell you any storylines that were furthered, any stories that popped up, but what stands out for me was they actually found something for Mean Gene after WCW, which And it wasn't like a parading out like you mentioned the Legends Night. The Legends Night is kind of a joke of itself. The Battle Royal was a joke of itself at WrestleMania. Like they parade the legends out so terribly within the company that, and you kind of pointed it out, like it's almost cringeworthy to watch. So for them to actually have something worthwhile of substance for Mean Woo Gene,
My God, Gene.
by God, was actually very, very cool to see. But like I said, like I'm even trying to think, like I can't, nothing pops in my head of something of substance that furthered along any storylines or anything like that when it came to Confidential.
It was it's a really interesting show at the time because they used it to, and it's funny because Wikipedia mentions like, oh, notable and typical features. They used it to talk about real life situations like the passing of Miss Elizabeth. They used it to slander Stone Cold when he walked out in 2002. They used it as a way to kind of showcase like they follow. I want to say it was Matt Hardy that was on this, but they used it to be like, hey, here's what life's like for these guys on the road and on this big overseas tour and stuff like that. Um, they used it to talk about Hardcore Holly going too far with Matt Capitelli on Tough Enough. I mean, it was one of their. I can't say one of their because like Bite This was out there as a radio show online for a while, but it was one of their more first like mainstream behind the scenes type of shows. Before, of course, that just became the thing, especially on the network. So
Interesting.
I really enjoyed it. What else do we have?
I was kind of
Here?
looking forward to like the would you rather watch this pay-per-view or that pay-per-view?
I don't know if we're gonna have any this time. There was okay. We'll see if you have memories of this. 2009, WWE was supposed to have an episode of Raw from the Staples Center in Los Angeles.
Every time you say we're supposed to have an episode, I cringe a little bit because of
It was supposed to be in Denver. It took place in Los Angeles.
Oh yes, I remember this.
The venue got double booked with Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals between the Nuggets and the Lakers, so the WWE had to move to LA on short notice, and Vince McMahon spent the entire show mocking the Denver Nuggets, including having a main event 10-man tag where the 5-man team wearing Lakers jerseys won against the 5-man team wearing Nuggets jerseys. But that match is notable.
I know why.
Because
I know why. Kennedy.
This was Mr. Kennedy's last match in the company, his first match back since injuring his shoulder in August of 2008. So you're talking he was out from August to May, comes back, has an incident with Randy Orton, and what do you know, a few days later, he's gone from the company. Talk about other great examples of dropping the ball with certain performers. There's an entire history for Mr. Kennedy.
He's in good shape too. Like if they wanted to, you're not going to get the run. You're not going to get the run that he should have had with the Money in the Bank. He's the first one to lose the Money in the Bank before cashing in. He's in exceptional shape right now that I would love to see him get one more run.
Next Raw in Green Bay. They're like, yeah, he's going to get a Carlito reaction. And it's just like, oh, he's here. I think you'd get more of a Brian Christopher reaction. You'd have to bring him back at a Rumble in a Smark-heavy town.
Yeah.
And I feel like he'd get a damn good reaction.
Yeah, that's Royal Rumble was popping in my head too. Like he couldn't just show up on a random Raw wearing a ski mask and then he unveils to be Mr. Kennedy. Like I get the idea that there's too big of a window, and as much as people adore Impact TNA, like nobody it what he did there did not have a big enough, no pun intended, impact that he could just show up. Plus, he's been out of the scene for a while too. So, but yeah, I liked the shtick. I liked his. I didn't mind his work in the ring. So, I'd love to see him at least get his flowers. You know.
And the last notable thing to talk about is actually AEW related, as on this
Ooh.
day, 4 years ago in 2019, the first ever Double or Nothing event took place. And I am going to list off this card, and you let me know if you would have any interest in going back and watching the show to see just how different this company is 4 years later.
You know what? Just really quickly, what's popped in my head is we could actually do a whole show on All In finally. Seeing as how we talk about the past and some current stuff, but yeah, let's do it.
I mean, especially because you're going to have All In and All Out later on this year. Of course, one being in London, Wembley Stadium. So the first ever Double or Nothing card, which this was their first pay-per-view too. It was their first ever pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
Pre-show, Adam Page, Hangman, wins a Casino Battle Royale, last eliminating MJF. Those two have gone on to some bigger things. But interesting that, hey, 4 years ago, here were guys that were spotlighting on a pre-show to get people to hopefully buy this.
Right.
And now we see where they are since.
Yep.
Former and current champion. And Kip Sabian defeats Sammy Guevara. And my webcam disappears.
You're good. You're good.
Okay.
I'm working on my next segment.
Kip Sabian defeats Sammy Guevara. Things have gone just a little bit different
You're still
for
there.
those two.
You're still there.
Over the last 4 years. Just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing, what they saw in these guys 4 years ago and where they've. Yeah, and I mean AJ, Kip Sabian, and I like his character-ish. I kind of liked it better when he had the bag on the head, standing in the crowd, but again, it was something that they should have done something with sooner and didn't do anything with. So,
opener, SoCal Uncensored, SCU. Christopher Daniels, Frankie Kazarian, and Scorpio Sky beat Strong Hearts, a team coming over from Japan, of Shima, T-Hawk, and El Lindemann. For you on paper, that won't do much. For me, I'm like, I'd like to watch that match again.
You know what?
Because I'm a nerd.
I dug SCU back in.
Yeah, they were fun, man.
They had a really good dynamic between the three of them. So.
And obviously now Christopher Daniels, more backstage stuff, kind of a feature on the rebranded ROH side of things. Kaz went back to Impact, and Scorpio Sky has been used in the advertisements for Collision. So
that'll be interesting. I was just going to say, haven't seen him in a while, so.
Yeah, he was coming off of an injury. Like, he had the TNT title, and how he got it was a little bit messy. But
and how he gave it up, too. Because he didn't have it that long.
Presentation of him, I didn't think was that bad, really. A four-way women's match is listed here. Britt Baker defeats Nyla Rose, Awesome Kong, and Kylie Ray. So I remember this. Awesome Kong was a surprise reveal for this match, which was cool as hell. Obviously, since though, like Britt Baker, she's still right there at the top of that division.
Yep.
Nyla Rose was a big part of the roster at the beginning in the women's title hunt, but past couple years, more so relegated to like that secondary role. Still one of the best follows on Twitter. Fucking hilarious.
Nice.
One of my favorite moments in AEW is when she interrupted. Someone was getting interviewed. I can't remember who it was. And she just runs into frame and just yells, "Surprise, bitch!" and forearms her on the side of the head. It was like something out of a Chappelle Show skit. I died and still do to this day. Awesome Kong obviously didn't wrestle that much longer, but she was fantastic. And then Kylie Ray, who for multiple different reasons did not stick around with AEW.
She's kind of had like she's got all the promise in the world, but just doesn't have the desire or didn't have the.
It's something. I don't even know at this point. So.
Yeah, it's slightly disappointing, but if she's taking care of herself, take care of yourself, right?
Indeed. Best friends, Chuck Taylor, Trent Beretta beat Angelico and Jack Evans, which in current AEW would never get 12 and a half minutes on pay-per-view. But I
Yeah.
see that match and I'm like, I'm sure that was a fun, solid match. I like all four, people involved in it. But yeah, that would never see the light of day in terms of AEW pay-per-view anymore. It just would not. They had a 6-woman tag match. Hikaru Shida, who's still a very big part of their roster, Riho, who still makes appearances as well, and Ryo Mizunami beating Aja Kong, which was also just kind of weird because she was at the end of her career, Emi Sakura and Yuka Sakazaki. So all of them, outside of Aja Kong, I believe, have made follow-up appearances. This is the match that you look at where it's just like, oh, okay, they are like, to this day, they're just like, hey, if we want to showcase somebody, we're gonna do it.
Mhm.
Like if we want to be like, here's Nick Gage and Chris Jericho, we're gonna do it.
Right.
And I like that they haven't, stepped away from that idea.
I the name that popped up in that concept was Eddie Kingston. Didn't know about Eddie
Mm,
Kingston beforehand, but when he came out and just started talking even before he was through the tunnel, you knew he was going to be a star given the
mhm.
opportunity. That's the one thing you can absolutely give is like who's the biggest star that WWE has created in the last 10 years?
Roman Reigns.
Okay. But like and who else? Like okay, I'll give you the Shield.
Mm,
Like they always talk about who the next guy is going to grab that brass ring, but they're so terrible at creating new stars.
right.
Whereas, and you can make the argument AEW has stolen stars from WWE that they didn't know what to do with, and these guys didn't want to resign or anything. But on the other side of it is you have MJF, who we talked about earlier. You have Orange Cassidy. And I get that they started somewhere else and became indie legends or whatever. Um, but that's the one thing I really enjoy and wish they did more of, even though they have been doing it. Like Bandito didn't really have
Mm,
a platform, killed it when he was there. I can't remember the guy who got Kenny Omega on TV. And
uh, Vikingo.
yeah, absolutely killed it. Given the opportunity on TV, doesn't have to be a pay per view like in this instance, but um, AEW just giving those opportunities has been one of the feathers in their cap in their short existence.
And then you get to the big three matches of the show. Cody versus Dustin Rhodes in a
Mm.
22-minute bloodbath classic.
You
What a
want to
fucking match.
segment people's careers? That match in itself is Hall of Fame worthy for the both of them.
I mean, it's tough to name a better Dustin Rhodes match
The backlot brawl against
against Piper.
yeah,
I mean,
arguably,
this was
arguably.
this was like the match. Again, you talk about the styles difference. It was such an old school match, and I think the match too, where it established like, oh yeah, shit, WWE should have put Cody Rhodes higher up on the card. And then, hey, lo and behold, eventually they did. Not too high on the card, mind you, but high enough.
The bunkhouse brawl, I think Taps is referring to in the back
Hmm.
trailer of the.
Yeah, against noted former Repo Man and member of Demolition, Barry Darso, the Blacktop Bully.
I would go one step further to the thought you were running with is I think this really put like you can talk about people's careers. Mick Foley comes to mind. If Mick Foley doesn't get thrown off the top of Hell in the Cell, he
Mm,
doesn't win the title. He doesn't become an absolute wrestling legend, sweetheart, anything like that. He'll always be known as that mid card guy who pulled his hair out. I think this
probably.
match put AEW on the map. This was the one that people were searching out for. I know that something else is coming down in this description that arguably was one of the biggest news stories of the year in professional wrestling. But I think if they leave this match, they don't have the opportunity to run this match on this pay per view.
Mm.
It doesn't turn heads as far as what AEW is trying to do. This really solidified them as a threat to WWE.
the Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers in one of numerous classic tag matches that they have had, and then you capped it off with a match where the winner would face Hangman Adam Page to crown the first world champion at All Out a few months later, where Chris Jericho defeated Kenny Omega. And of course, Jericho would go on to beat Adam Page as well and become their first champion and enjoy a little bit of the bubbly.
So then I'm a little confused. Wasn't this also the debut of Mox? Or was that an all in?
That was on this show. Yes, it was.
So yeah, that's what I was referencing. That was kind of one of the biggest stories of the year. Was Moxley pulling a for lack of a better term, a Scott Hall. Just walks out in the crowd, walks in. I remember Jericho turning around, looking at him, like trying to get a good look at him, and like, "What are you doing here?" And then Moxley doing his little, shimmy shake, and then giving him, his finisher right there in the middle of the ring. I don't think he really did anything with Omega, or did he take Omega over to the chips?
He had his finisher on top of on the stage on the the stack of poker chips.
Right. Okay, so that's when you were talking about when you said Jericho won and then had got the number one contender basically. That's where I was a little confused. I'm like, but I remember Jericho looking right at Moxley and being like, "What? Why are you here?" or whatever. And I think he still hit him. And then that was the end of Jericho's whatever he needed to do with the pay-per-view, and then he just focused his attention on Kenny Omega then.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So overall, even just talking about it, I again would like to see them sign up with a deal with Max so I can go back and watch the show relatively easily. That would be very fun.
I think they could do that. I wonder if they could. I'm just spitballing, thinking out loud or whatever. I don't know the semantics, but I could almost see them running more of a Ring of Honor, UFC kind of situation where they run it off their website or something like that. But I also understand the idea of, having it on a Fire Stick or having it on the availability. But I don't even, do they even have an on-demand service at this point?
No.
So I would say, based on the discussion we had earlier in the podcast, I would say that that's the biggest blunder, is they don't have that yet. An on-demand service so that you could watch episodes, that you could watch former pay-per-views, versus having a channel of 24-hour. But I could see that going pretty dry too, just because of how many pay-per-views they run and how many years they've been around. That, I mean, somebody like you could probably run through that in months. And that's not a shot. That's just, yeah, exactly. But would you go back?
Enjoy it a lot.
Would you go back and watch them 3 or 4 times to make sure that you're subscribed to it yearly? You know what I mean? Like, sooner or later, you're going to run out of stuff to watch.
Well, if it was included as a part of like an HBO Max type of deal, where it's like, well, there's already stuff on Max that I want to watch, for example, it's just like, oh, cool. Instead of being like, oh, cool, well, this month I have Max, I'm going to watch what I want to watch, and I'm going to cancel it, go to Netflix again, and then switch back to Max in a couple of months, I'd probably just end up being tempted to keep Max the whole way through.
That's fair. Yeah, I think the fact that they don't have anything set up right now with on demand is I don't know, it's kind of hard to say 20 minutes ago that they're too small to do it, but if they could find a way to do an on-demand online service, like through their website, I think they should look into that and do that. But I don't think setting up with maybe you've changed my mind with that concept of watching everything else and then jumping over to within a membership. With that, Toog, I know you've got your stream to get through. I want to wind up my stream. Where can people find you for said stream and other things?
Everywhere at Toogie24.
I hate that you say it that way. I hate it so much that you say it that way. Everywhere.
But it is.
I get it.
search it. You'll probably find me or someone who took the name and posed as me on some platform. It's easy.
That's fair.
Yeah. There's
Where
probably an OnlyFans that exists. Am I on it? I don't know. Subscribe to them to find out.
you
I
didn't jump
guess.
on OnlyFans to squat your own name?
Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't.
Maybe not the best word to use for OnlyFans. You can find
no,
me.
I mean that's the best to use. The word for OnlyFans.
You can find me everywhere as Crash Andrews, YouTube, Twitch, except for this. Elon, fix it.
Never get rid of that underscore.
No,
buddy.
the
You got it
underscore
for
is gonna.
life.
That's got its own Hall of Fame career. Shout out to Stinger, the mascot of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who showed up at the Extros. And being the Extra, we leave the show the same way every time, with, again, another guy who you could put to Hall of Fame careers with his work in WWE and WCW. Bobby the Brain Heenan. Are there any swamps in Oklahoma? Yes, there is. It's called Tulsa. Screw it, Tulsa. Suck on that. He did. I added the end. Bye, everybody.
Oh. Fuck you, Tulsa.
I got nothing against Tulsa.
Fuck you,
Stinger,
Tulsa.
hello. Herms, hello. Herms, the wallet vampire. I'm worried he's gonna drop a link here, but he's probably waiting until you go live to get your money.
He likes to do that. Hasn't been a while.
Just a quick shot here. AEW question that won't make it to the podcast unless I edit it in, which I don't have the time or effort or desire to. TNT title, is it meaningless now? No, it's just in its. I mean, the fact that Wardlow's won it 3 times.
Hurts a little bit.
Yeah, I would have thought he would be into the world title picture by now, but I don't think it's meaningless. I mean, you look at the IC title and it's got its ups and downs. For every Godfather, and I don't mean to crap on the Godfather as much as I did. But for every Godfather,
Fuck you,
there's a
Charles.
there's a Jericho or a Miz who carries it with a lot of.
I'm gonna go.
Okay.
I love you.
How much time do you need?
Like 5 seconds.
And then you're going live?
Yes.
Okay.
Fuck you, Charles.
If I lean in,
Fuck
does that
you.
mean that we're kissing?
I hope so.
Bad Bros. Oh, the Irish goodbye.